back to Dormammu's costume. I mean, I know I'm going to have to go in and sculpt most of the costume details on. Thinking about these, I was thinking about just leaving them off entirely, but no, I think we'll try and do them. You can see that's probably a good example I gave you when I just snapped that off. While Milliput is very strong, the longer and thinner it is, the more likely it is to just snap. So something like that, it isn't really wise to make it out of an epoxy putty. It probably will snap. So I've been rooting through my fodder box. Hold on. See, all down there, fodder pieces, and over here I've got drawers of fodder in there. So I've been rooting through them looking for any ideas of what I could make these from, and I came across this beauty. It's a Scarlet Witch figure from the Famous Covers series. I got her as part of a job lot, and she had her tiara, whatever it is that the Scarlet Witch wears on her head, here. And essentially I was just looking for anything that would be long and thin and come to a point, and I've just sliced it down the middle and removed it. I've already trimmed it down a little, and so what I was thinking is we just put it on here, and I think that's a good approximation of that. We'll have to tidy up the bottom side and find a way to fix it on. However, hot glue will manage that. I'll just hot glue that on, and then I'll sculpt over, make it smooth. You'll notice that this one, how can I compare the two? Here we go. The one on the bottom here curves more in line with what's going on with Dormammu here. And I've done that by putting it in hot water, boiled water, for just a couple of seconds, and then taking it out and shaping it to the way you kind of want it to be, and then dipping it in cold water. You can put it in the freezer or whatever, and I mean it's not very hot water anymore now that I'm set it up, but you can see it's changed shape. So basically if you heat something, hold it in shape, well, plastic, and then cool it, it should retain the shape when it's fully cooled. That's a good tip for anyone that ever buys a Wolverine figure and he gets out the box and his claws are firing off in all directions. You can heat them and then shape them and then cool them, and they should be in the position you want them to be in. So there we have it. I'm going to start off with the red area you see in the picture there, the shoulder pad sort of thing that extends under his arms. I'm going to start there and then move on to the sort of cloth parts, trying to cover up a lot of the sculpted lines and the Mr. Sinister figure. So as I speak, I am working some epoxy, so it's ready to just get stuck in. I think this epoxy's mixed enough, so I'm just going to dive in and start sculpting, I suppose. What I've got my epoxy, I've got my shaping tool, one of these cuticle sticks I mentioned earlier, I've got my water, which is really helpful for shaping the epoxy. So let's just get to it. Okay, so just looking at the side-on picture, the brace comes down to just about the top of his pectoral, the sort of peak there, so that's more or less where that line is. So I'll just work some on there. And the shoulder pad sort of chest plate thing isn't very thick, so I don't really have to lay it on too heavily. I'm just going to lay on very general shapes at the moment and then go back and work with them. So then this part
goes under, is that right? It goes under his arm. Okay. And comes across into the centre a bit more. Like that. Right. So you can see it's very rough what I'm doing, but because we've got a couple of hours to work with the epoxy, I can go in and smooth that up. Okay, so I'm just getting some water on this tool and just going around and smoothing it down. I'm taking some of the epoxy away there, put on a bit too much. Like I said, it isn't a very thick sort of chest plate thing. Now I don't have to concern myself too much about getting it really smooth, because I can go in with sanding later and even it out. And really, when you do any kind of sculpting, you should always be prepared to sand it afterwards. It just brings out a much finer finish, and I think you can always spot when someone has sanded their sculpting work. It just looks that much, well, literally, it looks polished. So something that, whenever you're going to sculpt these sort of pieces of armour, something that you have to bear in mind is symmetricality. You want it to be the same on both sides, essentially. And you want it to have clean, sharp, equal angles. So I'm taking the flat edge and just trying to work So I've not worked on this side yet, I'll have to tidy that up, but I'm just going to compare what I've done to the image. It's alright. This, looking at the image, this comes down much further on them than what I've done, so I'm going to probably build this part down. Yeah, I think just under there, under whatever that muscle is. Answers on a postcard, please. I'm not very chatty today, am I? I'm actually off work sick at the moment. I was at a Star Trek convention at the weekend and I caught a flu. It's probably Patrick Stewart or Brent Spiner. Those guys are gross, covered in germs. Okay, compare it again. Alright, so while it curves that way, it has to curve that way, so go back in and change it around. Okay. It is thicker than a Word 10, but I can sand that down. I don't want to get bogged down in that sort of thing at the moment. I just want to get the general shape right before this stuff gets too difficult to work with. Okay, so I'm just going to try and eyeball it and make sure that it's pretty symmetrical. Something's coming across as not symmetrical and try. I'm using these lines, the lines of articulation as points of reference. Well, it seems okay. I think it's just the angle of the sculpt at the moment of this elevated part. Comes up much higher on this right hand side. See if I can sort that out. Okay. Right, so I also want to do the same to the back. It's the same round there. Something to watch out for is that if I go around and start working there, I'm going to be putting my fingers all over the sculpt at the front. And you always want to keep your fingers out of the sculpt. Even though we're going to sand it and reshape it and Dremel it down and make sure it's all looking good, you know, it's just a bad idea to be putting your fingers into the sculpt. You'll mash it all round. So, in the interest of time, I am going to heat the epoxy, and that will make it cure faster. It would normally take, if I just left it alone, what did I say before, about 4 to 6 hours to cure and become fully hard. What I'm going to do is I'm going to boil some water, put it in a tray, and then put the sculpted part in the tray for about 5-10 minutes, and hopefully that'll cure. So I'm going to just boil the water now. Okay, got the water. It's there. So I'm just going to put him in. Try and suspend, use his arms to prop him up so he doesn't fall all the way in. Alright, so more or less 10 minutes have passed. Let's take a look. Dribble, dribble, dribble. And yep. I'm scraping that. And it is scraping. So it's more or less, it's very hard now. As it cools, coming out of the water, it'll be fully hard. So that's that. So that's me reduce that 6-hour curing time down to about 10 minutes. Okay, so I'm going to get down to sculpting the folds, or not necessarily the folds, just his clothes. I don't want to go crazy with all the wrinkles and folds. Okay, so just coming back, I've sculpted over most of the details that I think need sculpted over. There's still some to go. I didn't get to do as much of the folds as I would have liked to. And again, I've heated the epoxy so that it's hardened. So what I'm going to do is just go in with my Dremel and do a lot of the folds probably the same way as I did with when I sanded off the legs. So yeah, I'm going to get my goggles on, get my sanding Dremel out and just go mental with it. Oh, the sculpting work on this just goes on and on and on. Okay, so I think apart from some of the details around his cuffs and his boot cuffs, I think that's mostly the sculpting on the body done. And yep, that's all there is to say about that. So hopefully he'll turn out okay, and then we can just focus on the head, which is the main part that tells you who the character is. But okay, that's his body sculpting pretty much finished.